I'm Derek.
And I'm Noah. You're listening to A Bite of...
Where we take our current favorite pop culture obsession and enjoy it one nibble at a time. Yeah. That's where we are mentally and sort of physically.
Yeah, this cold brew is not kicking in fast enough because this episode was tough. Not our episode doing this, the episode of Bly Manor that we're going to be covering.
So, I mean, like, just to get into it for a second, people were saying to us when they saw that we were watching Bly Manor, they were like, oh man, but episode 5, right? And we like 3 or 4 people messaged us that, and we were like, no, we haven't watched it yet. No. So, you know.
Yeah, like, let us get to it, but also... we get it now.
Yeah. I mean, like, people were warning us, basically. And this really was that episode.
Yeah.
For sure.
So let's just do a recap real quick of the episode prior. That way we can get into this, because also this episode was pretty confusing.
Yes. So I feel like this season, I feel like this season of our show, we're being challenged to think about the ways that we have to talk about these episodes of Bly Manor. So we started off with trait summaries, but then with the last 2 episodes, there's a lot of past and present. So we knew that we had to do past first. And this one is just like even more challenging. But in the last episode, we had to do a past present, and that was episode 4 of Bly Manor, called The Way It Came. And that's when we finally got to see Danny's backstory with the glasses ghost, Mr. Spectacles.
With Edmund.
And, you know, the whole marriage thing. And then we had the campfire scene and that awkward moment between her and Jamie. And
also not awkward. It was cute, though. They kissed.
Well, no, but I mean, then it got awkward because then Edmund showed up and she screamed in her face again.
Talk about a ghostly cock block. God.
Wah, wah.
I guess it wouldn't be a cock block. Whatever the equivalent is.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I know, me either. I mean, I was just going to say, in our personal lives, we only deal with cock blocks. So... anyway, so that was episode 7 of A Bite of, episode 4 of Bly Manor. So, of course, spoiler alert, but it seems like many of you have actually gotten to this point already. So thank you for not actually spoiling it for us, because nobody sent us any spoilers. So let's jump into A Bite of The Haunting of Bly Manor, episode 5, The Altar of the Dead.
I was scared even just by the title.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what we decided... compared to the past and the present, because this episode, it time jumped past, present.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so crazy that we're doing it by what we're calling sort of objects. So it can be characters or a thing, and that's how we're going to discuss this episode.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the interactions she had with each person instead of jumping from this one to that one to this one to that one. It's just... all the interactions she had with Owen, we're going to talk about. All the interactions with PQ, we're going to talk about.
Right. So, and that's actually a good point that you're bringing up, is that this episode is all Mrs. Grose with different people.
Yep. It's a Mrs. Grose episode.
Yes.
I thought I would be happy about it. Well, fuck me.
Yeah. Surprise, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But like in the way a horror TV show could be terrible.
Yeah, the most interesting thing about this episode is it's in like a non-linear loop, which makes it hard to, as I was watching it, I'm obviously mentally taking notes about, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about when we talk about it. But every time it would switch to a new scene, I was like, no. Yes,
I know. I know. When we finished watching the episode, we were actually eating dinner while we were watching it. And I was just like shocked. And then Noah's like, okay, I'm going to go wash the dishes. I'm like, he's like, figure out how we're going to talk about this. I'm like, how are we going to talk about this?
All you said was, by things?
By things?
Sure.
I know. He texted me from the kitchen. Yeah, by things works. That really didn't help.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with Owen and Mrs. Grose, because that's actually the first scene.
It picks up right, the last time at least, we saw Hannah. And I think I remember, I'm not too sure if I said it in the last episode, but when Danny's there and then she leaves, and it has that weird tiny little scene with Miss Grose just sitting there. I remember I physically said this during it. I was like, oh, don't leave Hannah in the cold by herself.
Yeah.
Little did we know we would find out why.
Yeah. I love you being on a first base with Mrs. Grose. I'm still calling her Mrs. Grose, but you and HG are like,
I wish.
Besties now.
She is my favorite character in this
she's so incredible.
entire thing.
She's so incredible. So we see that moment that Danny and Jamie walk in on, where Owen is trying to get her to go to Paris.
Yeah, he's in his drunken state because he's grieving his mother, and I get it. You know, everybody's lost a loved one of some sort, and you just want to get away from it. You want to get away from all of it, and I think it's really sweet that he wants to take Hannah with him. You know?
And that's the thing that's been keeping him there, is his mother. And now he's like, well, in a sense, she's free, and now I can be free.
Yeah. He says this really interesting thing. He says, we can't count on the past. We think we have it trapped in our memories, but memories fade and we're wrong. Any of us could die at any moment, or we could forget our entire lives, which is kind of like dying.
Yeah. And then he says something to the effect of, and I don't know the exact quote, but he says something to the effect of, like, people believe that once you can leave, like, present thought, you're free. And he's like, my mom had dementia, so she was leaving present thought. So she was free already.
Right. She was transcending.
So there's all this talk of mortality and death and what it means to move on. And then we cut to the past when Mrs. Grose is standing in the kitchen of Bly Manor and Owen walks in, and you notice that, like, although his glorious mustache is still there, his face is clean shaven around it, right? Because when we see Owen, he's always got some sort of stubble on him.
He's been taking care of his mom a lot. So.
Yeah, he's been stressed out, running back and forth from the manor to home. And it turns out that Mrs. Grose is running his interview to be the cook there.
Yeah, and she seems super uncomfortable. She's like, I'm not used to this. Let's do it.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Sounds good. So they go back and forth, and she's like, well, you were just in Paris. Why are you going to be here? And then he kind of lets her know that it's because his mom is sick. He has to come back here. And then we hear someone go, Hannah, they're here. And so she kind of gets up and she's like a little confused. She doesn't know what's going on. And she walks out the door and bam, she's in another scene. But this conversation between her and Owen keeps happening over and over again. It's sort of like the marker of each time she's realizing a little something is off, a little something else is going on. And the Owen in these like sort of visits is saying to her, think about it. Yes, we're having this conversation again. And there's one thing where they keep picking up where he talks about his time in Paris. And he talks about how he was a sous chef and all he had to do was chop vegetables. And it was just really funny because the actor Rahul Kohli tweeted out, I never want to hear the line, in Paris, I was a sous chef, which means they only let me chop vegetables for the rest of my life.
I mean, it's a great line. So your fault for delivering it well.
Every single time you had to deliver it.
Yeah, that is true. He did do it at least like 5 times, maybe.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think literally this episode is going through time. What we're seeing is where she's going in her head every time we see her, disappear or go away.
Right.
So I feel like that interview with Owen is really the anchor. She keeps going back to it because I think she, loves Owen in some capacity. So I feel like she's in a way talking to herself, but using him as like the vessel.
Yeah.
To talk to herself, because he even says, I'm you at one point. And that's when you're like, oh, okay. So these are memories, but they're also her. Like she can, And like you're saying, like Owen, I think is the only safe person in that house for her, like her only confidant, especially because it was PQ, Miss Jessel, and Owen. So Owen is the only one that she could really talk to open and honestly. And that's why I think he's appearing in her head. Yeah.
And so all the scenes with Owen are really just revisiting this conversation and her being aware of what's maybe going on, because he's reminding her of things, right? He's like, talk about Miles a little more. Say, are things okay with Miles? What's going on? And he yells at her sometimes and it snaps her to another part. And it's just this constant of her digging into her own subconscious.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just a way of her mind to be like, you need to remember this correctly. You need to figure this out. Even though she keeps trying to go off, or we have to do this again. Like, how many times are we going to do this? And he's like, it's up to you.
Yeah, you tell me.
Right. Like, you need to figure it out, Hannah.
Yeah. And I just think, like, stepping back a second and looking at them as actors, they both had for her, she's had to play this whole season on different levels. Whereas for him in this one scene, he has to be Owen, but be Mrs. Grose's version of Owen. Like, it's very layered. I think it's very delicate, and I think it's done really, really well.
Yeah, I think the first time we saw it was what actually happened, aside from, Mrs. Wingrave calling for her at that point. Because that's when the performance, even, when Owen was tearing up and the story with his mom, that's probably exactly what happened. And every time we see that, it breaks the fourth wall in a sense. Yeah. More and more every time you see him completely acting out of character, which is her doing that to herself. So it's super interesting. It's a really, I feel like this episode is on par almost with the one shot. I don't know what the rest of these episodes hold, if there's one that's more closer to that one shot in the Hill House season, but it's just crazy what even Hannah had to do from transitioning from one scene to another. Yes. Like, as if she was literally, like, time jumping, essentially. Right. So good.
Yeah, so she had she had to prepare herself to be like, okay, this is that time I'm walking into that room. This is where I'm coming from this time. It's just like...
For the 17th time.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. And it's like, I'm thinking about it, like, I kept trying to pay attention to what she was wearing, and I'm wondering maybe that was a tool for her as the actress. This is what I'm wearing. This is who I am on that day. This is why I put that on. Like, oh my God, so incredible.
And the last time we see her speaking to Owen, at least in this instance, was when he really tries to drill into her, something's wrong with Miles.
Yeah.
Something is up with Miles. Something happened with you. So it's more like trying to get her, like, you need to remember. You're not remembering what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that really encapsulates Owen and Mrs. Grose in this episode. So let's move on to Miss Jessel.
Yeah.
In this episode. So the first time we see Miss Jessel, it's the next time that her and PQ are seeing each other after the whole batter fight, the cake batter fight. So Mrs. Grose is watching them in the classroom and basically watching Peter manipulate Miss Jessel
even more.
Yeah.
I hate watching it because you see it and you know what's happening, but we can't do anything about it. And she's so, I don't know if she's so hurt or she's so vulnerable or she just wants love like that she believes Peter.
Right.
And it's interesting to see Hannah, Mrs. Grose, watch this. And there's a moment where, so there's this thing that happens with people that are very manipulative or, abusers, emotional abusers in a way, where they try to think that you have some sort of power. Or they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I just wasn't myself. It's okay. It's fine. And that person is like, oh, I have the upper ground in some way. And she says, you can't ever talk to me like that again. And he's like, I won't. I never will. I never will. And he never does.
True. Got him.
Right. But damn well he's a liar and he's lying.
Right. Because he just needs to manipulate her for whatever reason. So then after this scene where we see PQ manipulating her, there's another scene with Miss Jessel and Mrs. Grose in the chapel on the grounds.
This is another frustrating scene. Only for Miss Jessel. Like, because she's in denial. The whole thing.
Right.
She's denying everything that's happening. She's trying to reason and make it okay for her to be with somebody like PQ, even though everybody, including herself, knows it's not okay.
Right. And Mrs. Grose even says to her, he scares the shit out of me. And Miss Jessel's like, he scares me too.
But in a good way.
And what's sad is that it's like, there's that thing of when you're in a first relationship, when you're first in a new relationship and it's exciting and a little nerve-wracking, but it's nerve-wracking because you don't know where it's going. It's like, no, I think they're both scared the same way, that he's going to do something bad. And for some reason, Miss Jessel thinks that's a good thing. While Mrs. Grose is sitting there going, no, honey, that's really bad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what it is. But and it's interesting to see how that conversation played out because Hannah's right, 100%. And I think Hannah may be speaking from experience, or she just knows. She's looking at it from the outside. It's easier to call it what it is when you can do that. And Ms. Jessel, Rebecca would not be able to admit it. There's no way, because she's trying to reason in a way. She's using Hannah as a soundboard, but doesn't want to hear the opposite of what she wants to hear. And it's super frustrating. And she storms out because she's like, "You're wrong. You're wrong. He's amazing. Yeah. I've never felt this way before." Yeah, we've all heard it. Like, you're not thinking correctly.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Next time Mrs. Grose is with Miss Jessel, Mrs. Grose is sort of like blasted into the bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, she's just in the bedroom, and it's Miss Jessel's bedroom, and she's literally sleeping with PQ.
Yeah.
And he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's like, I gotta go. And she's like, "Don't leave." And he's like, "No, I got big plans tomorrow. I have all this stuff going on. We're going to leave. We're going to go to America and we're going to be the king, queen of America." And of course, she's in love with him. She buys into it. She's like, "All right, I'll pack up tonight, whatever."
By the way, dummy, there's no king and queens in America. So joke's on you.
We don't have a monarchy here.
No, we don't. So stop it. Yeah. It's interesting. It's another way. Who knows what he was really running from? I mean, he was obviously, we found out in a previous episode that he stole a bunch of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that this is probably what's going on. He was waiting to get the money, waiting somehow to leave. And he's like, "Well, why not take her with me?" And that's a situation you never want to be in when you're in her position. Because then once you are dependent on the abuser or the person that's like him, then he has complete control. Yeah, come away with me to a foreign country where you don't have a job or anything, and I supposedly have all this money, so you need me if we go there. It's not, even though it might sound cute and she was super into it, that's probably what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because he's an awful person.
Yeah. This is totally off topic.
Oh my God.
But it just had me think. I remember seeing this documentary once where this doctor became in cahoots with like a morgue, and he would take organs and bones from dead people and sell them on the black market. Yeah. And then he was rich, and his wife was like, just like, "We're rich now. Like, how cool," not realizing that he was stealing bones and like putting pipes in people. And then they found out, and then he got arrested. But the wife was like totally dependent on him. And she was like, "I didn't know."
Well, I mean, not wrong on her part. Like, if he's like supposedly a doctor, it's like, well, everybody thinks doctors get paid a lot. So cool. This is what's happening. But also gross. Like,
so gross.
Where is the black market?
I don't know. Whenever I see it, it's like underground, like in a New York subway tunnel. It's
like an abandoned one?
It's like, yeah, where like an old Hoyt and Skimmerhorn tunnel or something like that. Like, there's that one platform that all movies shoot on in New York City. It's that one.
I'm always terrified to Google the black market.
No, they'll come find you.
I know. But I want to know where it's at.
No, you don't.
I do. I really
do. No.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry. So this scene ends, and with Miss Jessel turning to Mrs. Grose and saying, like, "How are you in this memory with me?" Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is that Miss Jessel and Peter Quint have this whole conversation in the bed with Mrs. Grose standing right there.
Yeah, that's when you start noticing that, like, oh, she's not, like, literally traveling through time or whatever. You know, there's something more up. There's another layer to what's happening.
Right. And so he leaves, and then Miss Jessel turns to her, and she's like, "Hey, you're never in this memory. What's up?" And then she's like, Mrs. Grose is still trying to figure out what's going on, and she goes to leave, and Miss Jessel says, "No, I think it happens tonight. Don't go out there tonight."
Yeah, she's like, "I can't ever bear to watch it."
Ah!
Terrifying.
Yeah, so what this shows us in a way is that whatever it is, if they're trapped there or whatever, they're all in this plane together, and sometimes it crosses over.
Yeah, that's the part that's a little confusing, because what most of this episode insinuates is that it's her, like, essentially she's dreaming, or this is where she goes every time she seems like she's spacing out.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's that extra level where, is this Mrs. Grose, like, putting the pieces together?
Or are they constantly just reliving their days in Bly?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the part where maybe we have to watch more.
Yeah,
to find
because
out.
it's like, how did she know about that conversation if she really wasn't in the room that day?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's interesting. So let's roll back a bit and talk about Peter Quint.
Ugh,
and
I hated him
Mrs. Grose
even more during this episode.
Yeah.
He's the worst.
He's the worst.
Don't make a song with Peter Quint. How dare you? I can't. No. He doesn't deserve it.
Do you want me to go lower? He's the worst.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
When we first see him this time, so there's that scene, take it back, where the first time she leaves Owen, someone says they're here.
Mm-hmm.
She walks out the kitchen door, and it turns out to be the front door of the manor. And Mr. and Mrs. Wingrave are there. Unky Wingrave is there. Little baby Flora and Miles are there.
Boo.
Just Flora?
Yeah.
Yay. And then
Peter Quint.
Pequeasy.
Yeah. This has to be, I don't know how early in his career as whatever Peter Quint is to this family, but you can already tell she hates him.
Yeah.
Like, they all come inside and, you know, Mrs. Wingrave is like, hi, Hannah, blah, 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 whatever. And she turns to PQ and she was like, those bags should be brought in immediately because it all came in from a trip.
Mm-hmm.
And he lights a cigarette. He's like, yeah.
Yeah.
You little
Straight
shit.
away.
Yeah. And you could tell that she just hates him.
Yeah.
From that moment.
And it almost makes you think, so when the whole family sees her, they love her. Right. They're so happy to see her, even Unky, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is like, okay, well, if Peter Quint is his business associate, why would he be bringing his bags in? So it's like, was he originally just the driver that then weaseled his way in to Unky's business? You know? So there's that interesting thing. And she hates him right away. So the next scene that we see with PQ and Mrs. Grose is PQ is in the bedroom of the now passed away parents.
Yes.
And he takes a necklace out of Charlotte's drawer.
And again, Mrs. Grose comes in and is like, what are you doing in here, sir?
Who do you think you are, bruh?
Yeah, and there's this power dynamic going on. And not necessarily from Mrs. Grose's side, but she has to act like the defender, or she's being very protective because she knows that he's slimy.
Yeah.
She does not like him. She can see what he's doing to Miss Jessel, and she don't like it. And to see him stealing from Charlotte, from Mrs. Wingrave, is not okay. Like, they passed away.
Yeah. And it's someone that she loves as well.
And that left her.
Yeah. And she says something like, when she is first looking in the room at Miss Jessel and PQ having a conversation, she goes back to vacuuming, and then he comes out and he's like, really, quit it with the vacuuming. And she says, it's my job to take care of this place.
Yeah.
And I think she takes that very seriously, that responsibility, the children in the home. And he's infringing on that.
Yeah. Yeah. She asks what he's doing, and he says, oh, Uncle Wingrave asked me to come and get a few things. And she's like, really? He asked you to come get this dead woman's necklace from her drawer in the middle of the night? Okay.
That's worth thousands of dollars.
Right, yeah. She's like, it's worth like $4,000 or so. And she pretty much makes him give it up. She's like, give it to me and get out.
Yeah, she puts her palm out and she's like, and she stares straight ahead so strong. Bam.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last time we see her with Peter, just an alone interaction, is the night that he leaves Miss Jessel. She watches him go back into the room and steal the necklace.
Yep.
So let's pause there with PQ and take a step back, because someone that I want to talk about is Mrs. Wingrave. This is the first time that we're actually seeing, other than that photo, the character on screen.
Yeah.
Like as a living, acting human.
Aside from just a name also.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's one really intense scene when Hannah walks through a door and she ends up walking out of the manor in the middle of the night, and she just starts screaming out of frustration. And then up pops Mrs. Wingrave from the bushes.
Yeah. whatever. These people keep popping up out of nowhere. I don't trust anybody. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what she sounded like. Hello!
She's like, what's up, girl?
Do you need help?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
She's like, what's up? How's Sam? Who
Right.
we find out is Mrs. Grose's husband. And
assumingly.
Right. And all she says is he's happy with her somewhere.
Yeah.
And like Mrs. Wingrave is like, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Yeah. It's really interesting because you see, so this is where I get not worried, but what's the word? Again, it goes back to the whole, is this Mrs. Grose dealing with these things because she's in so much denial with what happened with her husband? So did these conversations really happen?
Yeah.
So when she came out of the house to scream, did she do that in real life? Because why would she? Was it because of her husband, or is it because she's realizing what's happening? She's repeating a lot of things.
This is her frustration in that cycle.
Right. And for Mrs. Wingrave to just pop out of the bushes out of somewhere, it seems to me that Mrs. Grose is dealing with these things and she's using different people to figure it out.
I agree. And something that I think was interesting about this appearance of Mrs. Wingrave. So this takes place in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Right? So
give or take,
right? 87 is sort of the current timeline, and then drop back. I think the youngest they say Flora is 5. So that's 3 years earlier, let's say. Mrs. Wingrave is dressed very like Victorian in this scene. Mm-hmm. She has this like lace almost buttoned down up all the way up to her neck, like a turtleneck. She has this very light wrap on. So like something about that is just making me question, like, when does this actually take place? Who are these people? How long have they been there?
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Right? Because in a lot of Owen's conversation with her, he says stuff like, this town is a glue trap. You get stuck in here. You can't leave here. Mm-hmm. So it's like, have they all been stuck there forever? You know, for like the longest time?
Maybe. I mean, but remember Flora says that her parents aren't there. Her parents never came back.
Right.
So, which would make sense because they didn't die on the grounds.
Yeah.
So that's also what's making me question a lot of what we're seeing. Because regardless, it's part of the story. We're figuring out what happened with Hannah. Mm-hmm. And the next scene that we see her in is in the cathedral. Or in the chapel. Not cathedral. Yeah. It's not that fancy. And she's helping her deal with getting over Sam. You know, Mr. Grose. And she said, oh, I lit a candle for him. And Hannah's like, well, why would you light a candle for him? He's not gone. And she's like, girl, he gone. Like, he should be gone from whatever situation you have going on, essentially. Right. Yeah. But now I think we found out the 4 candles.
Yes.
It wasn't for PQ, because I was thinking about it and I was like, why would we even suggest it was for PQ?
Yeah.
She hated him.
And we thought, I think we had said that we kind of, we took that back and we said, oh, her husband's dead.
Right.
But, I mean, we were even wrong in that. It was for her husband, but it was just that he was gone from her life. Mm-hmm. So we almost got that.
Right. Yeah. And it could be for him or it could be for her.
Oh.
You know, so it's one of those two. I'm not too sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
What if it's for her?
Yeah, sad.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
It's for herself. Oh, forget it. End the episode. I want to go cry. Oh, no.
So that's really the last time we see Mrs. Wingrave.
So let's get to the children. Mm-hmm. The children. Mm-hmm. Our first sight of Miles is he puts that right hand in his pocket and he sees Jamie on a ladder taking branches off of, I guess, some sort of shed or something.
It's the greenhouse that her and Danny went to.
Kissed him. Got it. Mm-hmm. And he walks up to the ladder and he starts shaking it.
Yeah, little fucking shit.
Yeah. And so, like, Mrs. Grose is coming at him. Jamie's coming down and she's like, if you ever do that again, I'm going to beat the shit out of you.
Just do it already.
Yeah. He needs a beating real bad.
He does.
And then we see him again with PQ's lighter.
Lighting a cigarette.
A fag.
Yeah.
Rude.
Stupid.
Rude. Just out here enjoying a fag. Where are you getting all these fags? He can't walk into a store as a 10-year-old.
A good point, but also the times, maybe they just have like cartons of them sitting there. I don't know.
Okay, weird. So PQ had a stash on the premises that Miles found. The next time we see Miles, he's standing in the hallway in the middle of the night with Flora when PQ comes out of the bedroom with Mitch Jessel when he has his big plan going. Mm-hmm. And he's like, go to bed.
This is after he steals the necklace, too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, we can't. And Miles says, or Flora says, like, no, something happened in her dollhouse. You can't come out here. It's not good. And he's like, go to bed.
Yeah, Miles also says that there's a noise downstairs, like he heard something.
Yeah.
Right.
And Mrs. Grose is just standing in the middle of this. Again, sort of like an omnipresent
Nobody notices her.
thing. Right. Nobody notices her. And sure enough, who comes along? The faceless, raggedy, dirty, mud-ridden footprint Lady of the Lake.
Yeah, this mysterious ghost that keeps leaving footprints. We have no idea who she is yet. And as PQ is pretty much telling him, like, go to bed. Stop being stupid. She just comes out of nowhere, grabs his neck, and drags him off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
the neck.
Okay, that's fine. I hate him. Bye. Thank you. Taking out the trash. And then, like, literally 2 seconds later, Peter Quint just comes walking out like nothing happened. And he's like, what are you guys doing out of bed? And Miles is like, wait, what happened?
No, not good.
Right. And Hannah's seeing all of this. So I'm very curious if it's even true again. But this very important part happens, and Peter Quint touches Miles on the shoulder, and he starts speaking through Miles. He essentially possesses him, and Hannah is seeing all this, which is super interesting.
Yeah. And this is when the Lady of the Lake comes back out of this room, still holding him by the neck, and she's dragging him down the steps, and you hear his feet, dun, dun, dun. He's going, let go of me, but he's screaming it through Miles.
Yeah.
And he grabbed him on that right shoulder, which is that right arm that always goes right into that pocket, baby.
You're so fixated on that pocket.
Because that's where he touched him. That's where he entered him. So that's our signal every time that he's becoming Peter Quint.
His eyes also change colors too.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, I think it was like the second episode, I think. Because remember, I was like, why were his eyes two different colors? But then they weren't the next scene, and I was like, oh, never mind. I guess I was wrong.
Yeah.
But it happened again. Scary.
And then Mrs. Grose watches the Lady of the Lake walk his dead body into the water.
Right. And then turns around and sees Ms. Jessel.
Mm-hmm. With white eyes and...
Dead, clearly.
Dead. Yeah. Spooky things.
Yeah. So one thing to mention that we've noticed with Hannah, Mrs. Grose, is there's this crack. You know, she saw it and she's like, Jamie, go fix it. There was no crack when Jamie went. She keeps seeing it everywhere. And throughout this episode, and I was glad we saw it more often because it's like, okay, we're going to figure out what this crack means. And every time she saw the crack, you would hear water dripping also. So it was like, interesting. Very, very peculiar. So this next part, and it's the big pivotal part and pretty much the whole heartbreaking scene of the series thus far. Even more heartbreaking than Edmund. Like, I mean, we didn't really know.
Yeah, we didn't know Edmund. Yeah.
Is she catches Miles trying to smoke again, or he just finished a cigarette. Yeah. She chases after him. She winds up at the well that we first met her at, and Peter's talking to him. Still talking to him. We don't know how much time has passed by. Obviously, it's been a little bit. And she's telling him, like, get away from PQ. And I think the interesting thing to, I guess, remember about this as we're talking about it is depending on which memory or time that she's in, she acts as if she's doing it for the first time.
Right. So it's the first time she's living it.
Yeah. So even though she saw PQ die, it's as if she's like, Peter, get away from him. The cops have been looking for you. So it's interesting that she's kind of role playing with it, you know, and she's just reliving this whole moment again. And of course, PQ takes over Miles' body and he's like, you ruined everything. It was so close. And then pushes her down the well.
Yep.
And she turns into Bent Neck Lady number 2.
Bent Neck Lady number 2. And the last thing she saw was the crack in the side of the well.
Yup.
And then zoom up top and she's staring at herself dead in the well. And that's when Danny walks in for the first time and meets her. And that's what she was staring at. So some theories that we've had, right? I actually completely missed her staring into the well in that first episode, and you had brought that up.
I thought it was weird.
Yeah.
Because at first she was just staring in the well, and I was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But the fact that she seemed off I was like, wait, why is she staring in that well? That's interesting. And then that part in the cathedral with Mrs. Wingrave, when she opened the door, for some reason I was like, that's a well. I was like, no, the well.
Yeah. And I've brought up her always touching the back of her head. Mm-hmm. And that's where the impact was when she fell down the well.
Right.
And one of the things I said in the last episode is that, where's her room? She never sleeps. She must be a ghost.
That's why she doesn't eat either.
I know. Yeah. So she was dead the whole time.
Yeah.
But that begs the question, how is this working? Right? Because she sees herself dead, and then Danny walks in, but she's just a ghost that everyone interacts with. It's like Bruce Willis and The Sixth Sense.
I think so. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think with stories like this, they can really make ghosts do anything. I mean, you saw when PQ first turned into a ghost and he was trying to pick up Flora's doll. And it kept going through, and then all of a sudden he was able to do it.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's one of those classic tropes of, whenever somebody turns into a ghost and they have to like figure out their ghost.
Learn how to touch things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally.
So I feel like it's that, but also she died so quickly that she might not have remembered that she died, or she knew it, but I feel like her whole thing is denial. Almost everybody's thing in this show is denial and guilt. And I felt like she just pushed it all down so much because she was dealing with the Wingraves dying, Miss Jessel dying, whatever the frick happened with Sam.
Yeah.
And then whatever happened with her. And she loved those kids.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when she was talking to Owen about Miles, she kept saying he's a good boy. But there's sometimes, and it's like, what? Why are you saying that? You're like, so is he good, or is there something wrong with him? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you kind of see her inner trying to figure it all out.
I think the Uber fans of the show are going to go back to the 4 episodes prior to this and see every time she's lost in a moment and see how it fit into this episode.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they planned it out. I wouldn't be surprised if they planned it out perfectly.
Of course they did. They had to have.
They had to have.
Yeah.
I have one more giant question mark and out of left field prediction. I was like, they're all ghosts, and now I'm like, okay, she's a ghost. But what if they're all just pawns in Flora's little dollhouse?
I mean, that's what it's seeming like.
Right? Like, Flora's just a little girl. It's like the Twilight Zone. Like, a little girl is just playing with her dollhouse, and they're all just playthings for her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that it would explain why the Lady of the Lake looks just like her doll, like doesn't have a face.
Right.
But the thing that's interesting is that the others, like the other ghosts and stuff.
Good point.
They tell the kids to stay away from the Lady of the Lake, which is interesting. Like, why her? Why the Lady of the Lake? So I feel like a lot of this is going to come back to her.
100%. And even when she was singing in the attic in that one episode during hide and seek, it was another sort of faceless doll looking creature. And she was like, shh, I'm hiding.
Yeah.
So there's, like you said, there's some they have good relationships with, but for some reason, this other lady, no bueno.
Yeah. Yeah, there's they all said to stay away from her. Yeah. So,
and then it
was a very Danny Light episode.
It was Danny Light. We only saw her make her entrance in that episode, and then at the end, Hannah is sitting at the fire with Owen, and she's like, "No, I'll go to Paris. Let's go to Paris."
Oh my god, I hated that scene. That scene started. I couldn't.
And then he was like, "Alcoholicacy, bye now."
He was like, "Oh, alcohol you later."
Yeah. And then they keep walking, and she can't follow them.
I mean, she's already dead at this point.
No, but she realized it finally.
I wonder if Owen's really dead too.
Well, and that's another question I have. I want to know if we're going to get Jamie's backstory next.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like we're going to get all of their backstory.
Where does she go in that green truck every night?
I mean, nobody else uses the car except for her and Owen, so maybe they're the only live ones. Who knows?
And you brought up a good point where you said, how did Owen just show up there after his mother's funeral? He just was like, I just got in my car and I was here again. So,
interesting.
Yeah, they're
ghosts can't have disguises, can they?
Let me try.
Is Owen really PQ?
No! Sorry. I'm sorry. No, Owen's too great. We love Owen.
Bye-bye.
Oh, no.
I'm kidding. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll find out.
And that was episode 5. Everybody who was like, how about that episode 5? You're totally right.
It was great. I mean, it was good from a story standpoint. It was tough to get through, but I'm liking this season. I don't think it's as grotesque as the first one, but it's definitely more emotional.
Yeah. They really gave you a buy-in to these characters. And I think that it's interesting where in the first season, we were so emotionally connected to Nell, and we waited till very late in the season to see her, like that she was dead in the bent neck lady. That in episode 5, this is only sort of halfway through the season.
It's a little more. Yeah.
And we've already lost Mrs. Grose. We already know what her story is. So I feel like there's more sort of twisty-turny anguish to come.
There has to be.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be much of a story if there wasn't.
Because I kind of feel like I'm like, okay, well, we just like checked off a bunch of things that we thought. So season's done?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ay.
We'll see.
But before we go, maybe we can lighten the mood a little bit with the one and only Creepy Kids.
I don't know about lightening the mood because it's my turn to pick and I never do that. So I picked Gage from Pet Sematary.
Oh.
Because unlike the most recent movie that came out, if any of you have only seen that one.
Mini spoiler alert.
Right. In the original, Gage is the one that comes back because he's the one that gets hit by a truck. And he's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So when he tragically gets hit by a truck, the Creed family resurrect him from an ancient burial ground. But surprise, it's cursed. And he comes back as a, like, scalpel-wielding, perma-scowl murderer with a scar.
Whoops! Yeah. Can I do a subsection to our second section of this episode? Creepy cats.
Sure.
Who's the cat in that movie?
Church.
Creepy cats.
It's not Church's fault, okay?
I know.
I love that movie and that book. All right.
Oy.
Hopefully the next episode's much more lighthearted.
I need a cookie.
Yeah, cold brew didn't do anything for me.
No.
All right, bye guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to A Bite Of. Artwork and editing by our own Noah. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram at A Bite Of Pod and on Facebook at A Bite Of. If you have questions, recommendations, or just want to say hi, you can email us at abiteofpod@gmail.com. You can find us on all podcast platforms. Please be sure to rate and review to spread the word. Hope you join us next time on A Bite Of. Bye!